Hi, my name is Philip Bither. I'm the curator for performing arts here at the Walker Arts Center, and with me is Annie-B Parson, choreographer, director of a brand new work called The Mood Room, and co-founder of Big Dance Theater. And so, welcome back to the Walker.
Thank you, Philip.
It was great last night to have this work come back to life 2.5 years after its premiere.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, it's been a long journey of COVID postponements and injuries and other things. How did it feel after last night?
It felt like a miracle. It felt like that thing of you feel like you make work and it just disappears as soon as the audience leaves. And so having the opportunity to bring it back and see what it is was really exciting.
Is it always a joy to remount work, or is it sometimes a drudgery?
Sometimes it's never a drudgery, but sometimes it's a shock that it doesn't still not alive. Yeah, and or it doesn't still have some kind of rhyme with the world. And in this case, unfortunately, I feel like, fortunately for the piece, but unfortunately for the world, I think it's deeply relevant. Sorry to use the word.
Yeah. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, a little bit, because when I started working on it, I felt like the script was a beautiful reflection of this really dark moment at the beginning of Reaganism in like 1980, when I think he wrote it, maybe, I don't know when he was actually writing it, 79, 80, 81, Guy de Cointet. And I think he was observing the conceptual French artist who wrote scripts as art pieces, basically. They're sort of living visual art just disguised as theater. Or the opposite?
Yeah,
I don't know
right.
which. But because he was from France, probably he had a better, more detached perspective on what was going on in the world he lived in, which was Los Angeles. So we'll just call it Los Angeles 1980s, the beginning of the wellness movement, the beginning of the time where our civic duties perhaps were less important or less emphasized as part of like the nobility of life. And maybe instead Reaganism was suggesting, and Reagan himself was suggesting, that shopping was like the new religion. I am like old enough to kind of remember the difference between the Carter and Reagan ethos. And it certainly was the beginning. The Me generation, it's just such a perfect description of what that world was like.
Right.
So here was Guy de Cointet writing about it, and he observes it, and it has continued to unravel to a point where with the script, we were only switching out like names of cosmetics, but the perspective on the world and self-absorption, I guess, has only gotten worse.
Do you think de Cointet had, as a French artist coming to America and then landing in LA, he seemed to both sort of be fascinated and embrace fashion and Hollywood and some of the sort of LA culture, but also have a sharp critique of it all. He balanced those things, would you say?
Yeah, and maybe he had that kind of wit, that kind of what I would call like a French wit, where he loved and hated it simultaneously. So it wasn't like, it's certainly a critique, but it's kind of a loving critique in a certain sense.
Yeah. You've talked about how Guy de Cointet, really the text was just a part of really a kind of visual object theater almost that he created.
Yeah.
But then in your sort of taking his Five Sisters, you only took the text. You decided not to take any of the visual approaches that he took with the theater. Why was that?
Well, it's a little bit like how I've worked on almost any piece I've made that included text, which is that I only take the text. Like when I did Come Toujours, Here I Stand, I only used Agnes Varda's text, which was very hard to find because she didn't write it. She made a film the way we devise a theater piece. So I never watched the movie. And the movie
I
itself.
remember you saying that. I love that piece. Too.
That's, I feel like, for me, one of the most important works for me personally that I made. And I didn't see the movie on purpose, obviously, because I wasn't making Agnes Varda's piece. I was just using the text as a jumping off point for my piece.
Right.
So she was sort of horrified by that, but she agreed. And then when
That's right, because she was still living.
Yeah, she was still living, and we had to get an agreement, and it was her that answered the phone. She said, well, I need money. That's how she, what she said to me.
Right.
And then she told me the script was wet when it arrived, as if it had like fallen in the ocean. I don't know. She just said it was wet. She said, it's on the radiator. But anyway, because she couldn't understand what script I had.
Right.
Because apparently it was like, somebody had just
verbatim of
somehow I found it. But this idea. Oh, and then when I eventually saw the film, I let myself watch it after opening night in Lyon, and I was dying because it's so different than the script.
Yeah.
In fact, there were certain sections of text that I didn't realize were songs. I mean, just that alone.
Oh,
I just thought, it's great. Really, she's using rhymes. Never occurred to me they were songs. So we were just like acting out these songs and things like that.
Did you, I don't know if such exists, I should know this, but did you avoid seeing is there any videotape of Five Sisters?
Yeah, I avoided.
Yeah.
Yeah. Eventually I did the same thing where I saw a version, it's not the original, and then I saw a lot of the imagery, and the imagery isn't that different. Like it's women, 5 women, beautiful women, wearing white in a white gallery space, but still,
Right.
But I feel like the thing that we really don't have that's in the original is the light installation, which it was apparently originally a collaboration between him and Eric Orr, who was a light artist, and they were, they made it together.
Sound and light sort of collective or something. Yeah.
Yeah. So we didn't use that.
You and Paul, your co-director and partner in life, have also had a long history with Chekhov. You decided to go back to the original text of Three Sisters and draw some material out of that Guy de Cointet did not use.
Yeah.
I wondered if you.
Well, I couldn't stop myself because he calls it the Five Sisters, and so he's obviously referencing the Three Sisters.
Right.
So I did like a search through, his text and try to find any Chekhov that he had put in it, because the text is collaged with a lot of literary references, but as far as I can tell you, there's no Chekhov in it. I put it in because I felt like I gave myself permission because I needed to have a little bit more weight.
Right.
And his piece is very, very light.
Yeah.
And now I just feel like the relationship between the sisters and the world needed more gravitas and more explaining to us the way that Chekhov can tell us, like, she's suffering because she's happy and sad at the same time.
Right.
I mean, that's not in the piece, but it could have been in the piece. You know what I mean? But you wouldn't really know it was Chekhov.
Right.
But he has such a brilliant way of writing about especially women, but everyone. And I needed it. And I felt like Guy de Cointet would be okay with it because the whole text is collaged and he's referencing.
Right.
I mean, the scenario is the Three Sisters.
Yes,
they're returning to the
It's
house
same
of their
frame.
parents.
Yeah.
And so I really went for it.
Yeah.
It's all through there. Yeah.
I was reading back a little bit about the premiere of Three Sisters, and Gorky apparently said something like, he loved it, but said, it was music, not acting. And it made me think of how you talked about this as being kind of an opera using Holly's music.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could talk about how you think about it as a form.
I tried really hard at the beginning to think about it as the text being the libretto to an opera, so that Holly Herndon's music would be like a sixth sister or one of the protagonists in a sense, and not wallpaper.
Right.
Really in an effort to just hit up against that, bad dance habit of just using music.
Right.
That it could be as important on stage in terms of an expressive element. Like, I was listening to this song this morning by St. Vincent, and in it, it's a very rough song, and in it she goes into a guitar solo that's very, very emotional. And it's not like the world thinks, oh, that's about an electric guitar.
Right.
No, they think that's about rough sadness.
Right,
You know,
right.
that you immediately do that with music, make that translation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's a literal
Totally.
brain at play. So I felt like in this, like, is there a way to bring Holly's music, which is so animated and dynamic, into the space as such a strong expressive element that at times it could take over the room in terms of expressing the world? Because this is this piece is its own thing. It's not describing a thing eventually.
Right.
Eventually it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Almost like looking at a piece of art.
Yeah,
Of course.
exactly.
Yeah, right.
So I was trying to do that. So the way I tried to do it was like, you know, the scene where they're leaning on there and they have the mics, is
Yes.
Rachel there? They're like singing the
Right.
text.
Yes,
So
right.
the directive at that originally was try to sing with Holly's music.
Huh.
And I think that's the closest I got to my version of an opera.
There was moments that threw me back, sort of echoes. It felt. I'm sure you hear from everybody that sees the work. It's so open that you can bring a lot of yourself into it, and influences bubble up that you maybe never even thought about. But there were sections of dialogue that Christopher Knowles and Robert Wilson's something like Einstein on the Beach.
Oh, my God.
It felt like the pacing. Maybe Kate's work.
Kate's
with
work,
Wilson or something.
yeah, definitely.
And
She
Laurie
brings
Anderson
that.
at times. And
Yes,
things.
yeah. I do think those histories are there. I like the idea that the performers are bringing something with them, and Kate has such an incredibly strong history with that tradition of Wilson,
Right.
and his direction, and definitely, would you say, inspired by Wilson, who is one of my favorite choreographers. Yeah.
Huh. And you think of Einstein with Lucinda's participation as well.
I do,
but-
and but more than that, I think I was the most thinking of Foreman.
Huh.
Richard
tell me,
Foreman.
sure, right.
Yeah, because Richard Foreman, I feel like, with Wilson, are the two directors that I feel the most akin with, close to vis-a-vis the way they use movement. Not that, you know I have more dance in my material,
Right, yeah.
and I'm working more with dancers, but not that much more,
Right,
really.
yeah.
And nobody, there was this feeling in Foreman's work that the movement was, God, it's so integral to everything that's going on in the way they perform the text. So, it's used in a way that's such a giant expressive tool, as much as his
Right.
lighting design and
Yeah.
all that. So I think that's where my head was when I was making this. I also had a whole layer of, all the layers that go into making whatever you're
Sure.
making. Initially, I was reading the Gnostic Gospels, and I was thinking a lot about Jesus. I know this seems very unrelated to the mood room, and it is. So I don't want to sound super arbitrary.
Right.
But I did feel like it was important. I always feel like it's important that when you're making things, whatever you're thinking about should be in the piece, because the world should, it's your world at the time that you're making it. So I was not shy about working with the Gnostic Gospels. So nobody would know that
Right.
they're in there. But the way I used them was I wrote down every physical action that Jesus took in one of the books of the Gnostic Gospels. And I had them do all the physical actions of Jesus in the first workshop. And so he's completely in there, which is completely unrelated to, 1980s
seems the
LA.
opposite.
It seems
Yeah.
the opposite,
Yeah.
exactly. But for me, I can't really explain it. It was just super inspiring.
Is it sort of like the use of some of the specific Chekhov text in that lent some more gravitas to
Maybe,
it or
maybe
something?
just for me personally.
Yeah, right.
Like, I don't need anybody to know that, but I do think that, at least for me, I don't know how other people make things, I need to have a lot of sources for my own interest.
Right,
You know what I
right,
mean?
sure.
Like, if I was just working with the Guy de Cointet text,
Right.
it's just not enough.
Yeah.
You know what I
right.
mean?
Yeah, yeah. When I was thinking back on Chekhov a little bit and the time when The Three Sisters came out, I guess I didn't fully appreciate how radical a playwright he was, that he really laid the groundwork for people like Beckett and
Yeah.
Pinter and Alvey and
Yeah.
Shepard and things. In that, one critic talked about after the premiere of Three Sisters, something like, there's no action, there's no drama, it's just ennui and longing and sadness, or something like that,
Perfect.
Yeah,
That's
and
exactly what it
sort of
is.
yeah.
That is what it is. And I think that's where Guy de Cointet's genius is. He completely captures that. Nothing happens.
Right.
No one learns anything.
Everybody's waiting for something.
Everybody's
that never
waiting for
happens.
something. They're completely self-absorbed. I mean, it's so much like Masha, and
Right.
And they care so much about each other, but they really ultimately care more about themselves.
Right.
And I put, one of Regina's many speeches about the future at the end of the piece, but he's saying that through the entire play. And the way people are, it sounds very elegiac in a sense, but it's not in The Three Sisters. He'll say 200 years from now, life may be very beautiful, or we may all be living on different planets, and you may be on one, and you may be on one, and we may be very sad. And then somebody has said, it's time for dinner. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
it's so just chatty in a sense of everybody's just being themselves,
Yeah.
There's no resolution, there's no, third act epiphany.
Right. I guess Stanislavski said that, that Chekhov was really pissed about, how the first premiere went, because it didn't capture any of the humor. And I wondered if you could talk about your relationship to humor. This work clearly has humor
Yeah.
in it, but it's sublimated in a way that it kind of bubbles up. I heard individual audience members laughing at different times
Yeah.
through it. And is it irony? Is it a dry wit, or how would you describe the humor in
It's it was really fun last night to hear the audience laughing. I loved it, and I did have that same experience. And I thought of something Richard Foreman said, which is one of his things he hates is when the whole audience laughs together. And he loves it when audience people laugh separately, because
Right.
they're having their own experience.
Oh.
And this community of people that you gather every night in the dark, I mean, in a sense, it's sort of a yoga, because they're all sitting quietly in the dark, with this intense conversation, sharing breath, and here they are, and they're all experiencing this thing, this odd thing that's never happened before, will never happen again. It's a constructed reality that they're learning the vocabulary for, and they're figuring out how to understand it together, and yet they're all having their own perceptual systems with it. It's pretty awesome that they're each. The text is complicated and it's collaged.
Right.
So he takes you from Percy Shelley to an advertisement by about a face product to a Melville monologue. Kate does a monologue from Taipei.
Yeah.
And so you have to be that kind of listener that is willing to just bounce around and have fun and be surprised. And I think the laughs are surprises. Of like, oh my God, what? She just said what? Know? So, and I think you can also laugh at them. I think there's a
Yes.
little of that.
There's a little bit of like, oh my God, I can't believe how insular.
Yeah,
and,
exactly. This bubble that they live in, and also me too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, none of us can, point the finger at that.
No, definitely not.
I mean, I certainly can't.
And it's its own kind of gated community.
That's good.
Well,
I mean, that's why I added the Kafka thing, where I was reading The Castle when I was working on it, and there's a part in The Castle which I think is a really underrated book. Like,
Right.
especially from a movement perspective.
I'm ashamed to say, I don't think I've ever read it,
Oh,
but...
well, read it for the choreography.
Yeah.
Kafka describes movement in a way I think is
Huh.
beyond any writer. But I'm like obsessed with Kafka. But
Yes.
he, at some point, Kate, in the castle, there's just a moment where Kay, the central figure, comes and looks in a little peephole and looks outside and starts laughing. And they're so insular, you
Right.
know.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's not Kay, maybe it's somebody in the castle, and they start laughing at the outside world.
Huh.
And I was like, oh my God, they have to do that.
And you
because-
have that moment
yeah,
where
so I have
I'm not
that,
laughing.
Yeah, and that's from the castle. That's Kafka.
Oh.
So
Huh.
so I didn't think Guy de Cointet would have a problem with that.
Yeah.
I did ask in my mind many
Right.
times, and
Yeah.
and often I would say no, you know. But I thought that's just so perfect for their life, you know. They
Yeah.
just peek out the windows sometimes and go, "Oh, there's people that actually live differently than I do."
You know, I was so enjoying watching you work with the performers and getting the work back on its feet, and the level of detail, the moment to moment, the minute gestures, the lighting cues, the sort of movement of a single thread of the curtain
Yeah.
is, you take such care and specific direction, or you give such specific direction. I wondered, in this collage-like format of the work, do you feel like it's that level of attention to detail that the whole work rests on, and if it didn't have that level of craft, that it could all just kind of fall in on itself?
Yeah, I kind of think it would. I think that maybe that's where its juice is in the details. But maybe it's it's easier for me to work on tiny things and see how they come into big things. And it takes me a long time to sort of make larger realizations. I don't know what the piece is, so I'll work on, like, if you move that fringe with this finger rather than all the fingers,
Right.
it looks prettier.
Huh.
So then if I have like a whole bunch of those things, and then it starts to make a larger statement, and then I have a better entry in.
Right.
Yeah.
Were there still things last night that or is it every show you still see some things? And
You know, there's some very small things. We had
Right.
a few sound issues,
Yeah.
but yeah, there were a couple little tiny things. And also we have a new cast of two.
Right.
So they're
Yeah.
finding their way in.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's always going to be little things. I try not to pick at it too much.
Big Dance Theater has always been known for its remarkable set of design collaborators. And
Yeah.
in this work, with Mark working with Holly's music, and Lauren on scenic design, and Joe with lighting, and your wonderful costume designer, it seemed like you even exceeded yourself. Do you consider those colleagues as almost co-creators?
Absolutely. I feel like especially everything, actually, especially every single designer, I'm so involved with us making a piece together, and I have the good fortune to be able to have the sound designer. I was a sound designer, so that is my closest tie, is the
Right.
sound. So having the sound designer in every single rehearsal. Mark was in every single rehearsal from the
I remember
beginning.
back when
Yeah.
you guys did the production residency.
Yeah.
there 3
Oh,
years
even
ago.
way before
Yeah.
that.
Oh,
He
that's
was
great.
always there because we're making it together. So I absolutely, the design elements to me, that's why I'm so concerned about the lack of fully realized productions
Right.
now in New York, because it's just so personal to me that you have to, even if all you want to have is an empty set with a white light,
Right.
that's a fully realized production, if that's what you
If it's
want.
done well, and- yeah.
If it's done well, yeah. And so, yeah, it's absolutely central for me to figure out where I am. The costumes and the set are so descriptive
Right.
of the world. The color palette.
Yeah.
I mean, we worked so hard on this color palette.
It's so beautiful, and this serves as a kind of beautiful canvas for
It's so
such a range
beautiful.
of colors, and
I mean,
it
with the
really
lighting-
drives the energy or the emotion of the work in some
I mean,
ways.
it's so, Joe Levasseur and Lauren Moshin's work, and the way that it combines.
And Lauren did the scenic design.
Yeah, Lauren did the scenic design, and this was her very first work in the theater. She works in the commercial world. She's extraordinary. and yeah, the way they work together to create this, almost like you could feel a sauna or
Right,
the sunshine,
yeah.
because Guy de Cointet keeps talking about the sun in LA, which is so oppressive.
Right.
It's so intense
Yeah.
to be in the sun in LA, and that's one of the maladies of of Maria, the oldest sister, is that the sun is killing her. And she
right,
keeps complaining about the sun, the sun. The other thing that I thought Guy de Cointet really captures, something that I've noticed my whole life, is the way people obsess and possess their travels as if they own the culture.
Yeah, like they were talking, what was that land, the
Yeah,
island
she goes to
culture?
this remote island, and Guy de Cointet calls the people there the Bacus.
The Bacus.
Which I think he made up the word, because we've researched it and there's nothing.
Right.
So unless it's from some novel, it could be.
Yeah.
We couldn't find it, but the idea that, you go on safari and then you own that culture.
Yes,
And you're
right.
very proud of your trinkets, and you bring back your, and all that.
And these sort of
he's-
banal descriptions of, and they dance in front
yeah.
of their huts or
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly. And I, the way I ate the food and the way
Yeah.
I saw it and the way all the things I know about it,
Right.
And that sort of possession, which he must have heard over and over again in LA and,
Right.
in the 80s.
Yeah. Could we talk a little bit about the movement that is so delightful and idiosyncratic and sort of, it seems like between Holly's music and your movement, there's a seductive, sort of magnetic quality about it. And I know you've said that you intentionally chose to have a kind of non-post-dramatic structure, but there was a moment I wanted to ask you about when the four sisters come together, and they start their unison, that beautiful unison dancing where they're leaping kind of in sideways and somehow moving upstage and downstage together. And it kind of builds to what feels like ecstasy and a kind of climax with the circle of
Oh, the
spotlight
pops,
around.
yeah.
And did you see that as a kind of top of an arc in the work? And also, could you talk about constructing that particular, those phrases of movement?
Well, in the text, it says, the oldest sister keeps telling one of the sisters, you need a vacation, you need a vacation.
Right.
And the sister she's talking to is like, but we have to work. That's Chekhov.
Yeah.
But it's also in the Guy de Cointet. We have to work, we have to work. The Romans were healthy because they knew how to work,
Right.
and the older sister saying, take a vacation. You should go with Reno, which is one of the boyfriends.
Right.
And the text was so funny about Reno. Reno, yes, Reno. You should
That
go
was
with
from
Reno.
Guy de
And that's Guy de
Guy de
Cointet,
Cointet,
yeah.
yeah.
And she says, I can't stop thinking of the color of Reno's hair. Reno's hair is still in my mind. And I was like, oh my God, this is such a pop song.
Yeah.
We have to turn this into a pop song. And because I work a tiny bit in the pop,
Yeah.
industry, I have opinions about the way people dance to pop
Right,
songs. So it's
right.
like, okay, I'm gonna almost take, I basically what I did was I took the movement material from like a traditional pop,
Like unison.
downstage phase
Right,
saying,
yeah.
stuff like that. And then I put it into a accumulation, a Trisha Brown structure.
Sure.
So, and then we looked for something in Holly's music that could support it. But I didn't think of it as like a pivotal thing, but I love that.
You also use fingers, hands, arms, feet in such interesting ways. And sometimes the sisters are talking to each other, or there'll be hand action going on and finger movement, and a relationship between their arms and hands together that seems removed from what they're talking about, almost like subconscious vocabulary, but also reminded me of sister hand dances, how did you work
all
with
that
hands and fingers?
is right on. It's like I had three sisters, and we had a language of our own. We had a physical language. We had a constructed language. I'm sure we danced a lot. I'm sure we had all these physical ways we sat together,
Right.
like with you and your brothers. I'm sure the way that you piled on
Right.
to each other, your physical life together was different than the way you physically were with other people.
Right.
And I tried to figure out the most arcane coded material to bring that up. And I felt like there's so much stuff that happens in the house, you know, and one of the things that happens in the house is
when
people
you say the house, you mean anybody,
your
any
house,
family's
my house,
Yeah.
any family's house. You know, there's so many rituals and odd behaviors and language things that go back and forth, and reiterations of all sorts of, if you look at it choreographically, physical material that's going on over and over and over again. I was, you know, when we were growing up, we didn't have a remote for the TV.
Right.
But now you see, if you turn off the sound and you just watch like a TV show about a family, they're constantly going like this with the remote. You know, things like that. I don't know what ours were, but I tried to just make up my own for the sisters, and they are quite complicated. And also the thing is, in your house, you see people talking, but you don't hear them. Because they're in another room. I did a lot of that. And then the other thing is, people are always passing things in their house. They're passing glasses. And I was like, that happens a lot. Is they just, I had this thing where I was like, oh, they just should be passing glasses all the time, because there's always glasses all over your house. You know, and people are picking up this glass and moving, and just these very mundane activities that I just really heightened in the physical score.
And there's a lot of, I guess, all the way back to the three sisters, but I understand the five sisters too, entrances and exits throughout.
There were 95, 94 that Guy de Cointet put in. So I was like, oh, this is vaudevillian. I mean, it's like, so then I started getting into looking at I forgot about this, old films of entrances and exits in like vaudeville,
almost
entrances and exits.
Like
farce. And there's a lot of them in there. So, and there's also a dance from a silent film that's about going on and off stage. And so everyone, originally when we were just making material, we made a lot of entrances and exits based on old films. It's timed beautifully, because one person's leaving as another's coming, or two people are, it's all sequenced so that's
so
the fun part.
There's also an ominousness, almost like a horror movie kind of anxiety in the piece. And I wondered about, you know, the mood room itself is quite mysterious, and I think you wanted to keep it that way. But I was curious, in this house, what was the mood room for you? Is it decompression chamber, asylum of both good and bad ways, a kind of place to put the bad paintings? Or
Is the storage room? No, I think it's the decompression chamber. I think that's maybe where all the bongs are, or it could be, it also, in a sense, is death. You know, it's really non-living. So it's like you need to go there. It's a time out in the largest sense or in the smallest sense, you know.
This is going back a ways, but I couldn't help but feel like I didn't get a chance to get to BAM when it premiered, but we were together in the residencies you did here. And living together through, as a country, 2020, COVID, destabilization, racial uprisings, the sort of fraught quality of that time, 2020 to 22 or 3, that perhaps that when it premiered, it hadn't found its time yet at the moment, whereas now it feels like, not that things are perfect, but there's more breathing room for people to be able to have the patience to accept it in. Did you feel that way last night? Or
I felt that sometimes you make a piece and it's oddly timely. Like we had this with 17C, which was sort of about, you know...
Royalty?
Well, it was about royalty, but it was about date rape and issues of, you know, power and sexuality and things like that. And when it premiered, it just happened to be a night that, like, I don't know, Harvey Weinstein or something happened in the news that was very related to what was going on, and it was at the Harvey, and the whole room was like on fire about what Paul has this 20-minute monologue where he, you know, basically, you know, shows how entitled that character was about women. So and that was just luck. That, I mean, not lucky for them, but lucky for us that that the audience could, that this congregation of our church happens to be on the right channel. Was during COVID, I don't think anybody was on the right channel to watch anything. And it reminded me a little bit of a 9/11. We had a piece at the kitchen that was supposed to open on September 10th. and we did it on September 10th, and then we didn't do it on the 11th.
Right.
And then the kitchen said they wanted us to do it on the 12th. But there were a lot of firemen in that area in Chelsea that were congregating. It was like a center for, and eventually we did it on the 13th. And I remember the audience watching it. It was Shunkin. So it was when Cindy was playing
Right.
like the Bob Dylan character,
Yep.
and based on this Japanese early
And you
20th
did it
century
the
novel.
night
And we
after
did
the
it the
11th.
2 nights after the 11th, I think. And I remember the audience feeling this sense of solace, I guess, of
right.
like they were really quiet and they were really calm and they were freaked out at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
Like completely, who knows what's going to happen in the world? But we're here and we're watching this thing and it's kind of beautiful, was the sense.
Wow.
And it, unrelated thematically, it wasn't that it tied in any way, but they needed to be together, I
Right.
think. The audience and the piece needed to be together. During the COVID thing with this piece, I felt like it didn't have either of those things because I just felt like art wasn't art yet. You know what I
Right.
mean? We
Yeah.
didn't know what we should be doing. Nobody did. Audiences didn't know what they should be. They were thinking about so many
Whether
things.
they should even be together.
Or even they should be together.
Right.
And, you know, the water, you know, things like that you'd think would be, have some, but I felt like the world was too fraught.
Yeah.
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 A little bit.
Yeah. Well, it felt last night that people were really absorbed, taking
Yeah.
it in, and were
Yeah.
right there with
Yeah.
the work.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, because we're really thinking about, I mean, I have to think more about this, but I feel like the world is really thinking about what kind of society we should be.
right.
And dance is a funny, and I'll just call this a dance, because in some sense it's abstract enough
Right.
to sort of live in that world. We're thinking, you know, they used to say in ancient times when one village would meet another village, they'd say, what is your dance? What is your dance? You know, and like dance would represent something. And I feel like we're in a little bit of that moment maybe where we're like, what is our dance?
Right.
You know, how are we going to do this?
Yeah.
You
right.
know, and looking a little bit an open audience maybe right
Right.
now, that the
Yeah.
audience is open.
Yeah. Well, that jumps to a question I was going to ask a little later, but I'm going to ask now. You're about to publish your 3rd or 4th book, this one with Tommy DeFrance, the black dance historian, and it's 13 separate books
Yeah.
on dance history from a unique individual point of view from 13 different choreographers. Is that
Yeah.
accurate?
Yeah.
What has that taught you about American dance or the diversity spectrum, pluralism, dance in general? What are you taking away from that?
It's a lot, like a whole lot.
Yeah,
I think.
much more than I'm sure we could quickly touch on. But
Well, just that, you know, the project originally, I was going to write a book of dance history because I had read this book by Terence about Etheridge Knight. I'd read a poet's book about a poet. So this poet, had written a book about Etheridge Knight, who is a poet who'd spent many, many years in prison. And the poet's perspective, he said, was one of looking through at a mirror. And he said, when an academic writes about a poet, he's looking through a window. But when an artist writes about a poet, he's looking at a mirror, meaning he's also thinking about his own work.
Right.
And this book is so strong and meant so much to me. So I thought, I don't want to just know what I think what dance history is. I want to know what other people think dance history is. And it's a very impoverished field, I think, dance
Right.
history.
From a scholarly level.
Yeah,
in
yeah,
particular,
and dancers actually are a very intellectual group of artists,
Right.
as you know. So I didn't know what I was going to get.
What prompt did you give the
I basically
choreographer?
gave them the prompt to write about dance history, your version of dance history, but don't look anything up. So it's super subjective.
Right.
But I didn't allow them to talk about themselves. So I was very concerned they were going to write biographies,
Yes, right.
which is a different book.
Right.
And I hope they all write autobiographies, but that is not the book we were writing. I had the image of, in the Museum of Natural History where the prisms are hanging.
Yeah.
And they're turning like that on the light, and you keep seeing it from different angles. That's what I wanted, that dance history book. So.
Did you and Tommy write your own chapter?
Yeah. We've each written ours,
yeah.
and his is so good. But what happened was you see very, very different ideas of what dance history is, and some of them are just a little slice, which I love, and some of them, mine starts at cave paintings and goes to the future. So they're all these, and some of them are more personal,
Right.
and that's okay.
Yeah.
But they really are about how, like B.B. Miller's, for instance, she grew up in New York, in Red Hook. It's an incredible urban history of dance in the 70s and 80s. From her world. She was there. She
In
went to
Brooklyn.
Henry Street. That's where she studied dance. Yeah. So, things like that to people that are writing in an totally imaginative frame of mind. Mariana Valencia writes I like her book because she thinks about just memories of dances she's seen, which is really fun. You might really like that one.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I can't wait till it's published and we all get to read it. I think about the work of big dance theater, and I don't know if you would agree with this assessment, but you both seem to often be simultaneously looking backward, almost sometimes all the way back to the great Greek tragedy playwrights, to far into the future. And I wonder how you balance those things. I mean, you obviously, much of your work has literary references, which are historic, but you're also thinking about where we'll be in, like Chekhov said, in 200 years or 2,000 or things.
I don't think I think that much about it.
Yeah.
It's more like this text feels very open and I can hear the music for it. So I don't really think like, oh, it's 2,000 years old or it's written yesterday or I recorded it on the subway.
Right.
So I don't know that I'm that thoughtful about.
You sort of follow your passions?
Yeah.
What will be the next thing intellectually that's interesting?
Yeah, like I wanted to make a piece about, I was really interested, it's not very thoughtful, I think. It's more like what I feel like I got a piece, it's usually like I have a musical idea.
Right.
Starting
with music often?
Often.
Yeah.
And so like, or something that's kind of bothering me, like that I want to like rebel against. Like I was teaching at Ballet Rambert, I don't know when, 17 maybe, and in the breaks I would walk. 2017, and I would walk through the halls, and it's this beautiful building. Do you know it? Next to the National.
I haven't been there.
In London, and you can see into the studios because it's all glass. And I'm seeing all these modern dances where everybody's in unison, and they're all doing these unison actions and everything, and it's very mesmerizing. And I'm like, what are they doing? Like, why are they doing that? What is unison? Like, it's like a drug?
Yeah, Right.
And I was teaching choreography, so, I was thinking about it because there's a lot of exploration of the unison form, sometimes, breaking down stuff. So I thought, I really want to make a piece about, I want to make a piece of how unison is actually used in the world from the vernacular sense. Like, you've seen those North Korean films where there's 10,000 people all going like this.
Yeah, right.
It's, used for intimidation or used, in dystopian ways or used in utopian ways and, from like in folk dances and all these different systems of unison, pop dancing.
So was that the seed?
And that was the seed for the march, where I was like, so in a sense, that's an argument, it's an argument of, okay, you're using unison that way. I have a problem with that. I need to figure out what unison is for me.
Right.
So for me, it's like, how has unison been used since the beginning of time? And what does it do? And I had read this book about marching in the army, and the unison of marching. It's the writer, who was an anthropologist, said it was more ecstatic than sex. he said the physical experience of marching with hundreds of people in unison is extraordinary. And I was like, okay, I need to work with this.
Right,
You know what I
right,
mean?
yeah.
So those kinds of things are
And
more
haven't you
interesting to me.
always faced, as a choreographer in contemporary dance, this kind of audience love of unison? You know, there's
Yeah.
something about when,
Yeah.
not just the Rockettes, but you know,
Yeah, it
when
just
people
clicks
are,
in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you almost have to
You
resist
have to deal with it.
or-
Yeah,
or-
yeah. I think we've all resisted it. Like
right,
the whole
sure.
world of choreographers I'm with, it's like
Right.
it's very rare that things go into unison. And when they
Right.
do, like I thought Merce really explored the idea of unison as a non-unison. You know, like
Yes.
not the perfect like Rockettes.
Right,
But
right.
we're doing this together, but we do it differently.
So how did it go with the march?
It was cool. It was really cool. That was also what we called the sharing economy.
Right.
Where, we tried to share our resources, and it was
Same set of
great.
16 dancers.
Yeah, 17 dancers and 3 choreographers. And we felt, I think we were all 3 of the choreographers, we were very happy, and the work was all extremely different. So I can't speak for the audience.
Right.
But there was a sense of like this group of dancers all dancing these 3 very different pieces, and people found that really beautiful. And there were so many of them, and it was in the round.
It also, in a time when it's so hard in the U.S., it seems, for companies to stay together of,
Yeah.
of any dancers
Oh my
more
gosh.
than 4 or 5.
Yeah.
It seemed to posit a new model of sorts. Of
I hope,
shared
but it was
dancers.
never written about
Yeah,
as this
right.
idea, which made me sad, because I do hope other people that are able to will try this idea, because it was great for the dancers.
Right.
And very, very challenging, because the 3 choreographers were so different what they
Right.
were asking.
And that many dancers, even if it's a one-time
So many
project,
dancers,
it
crazy.
requires a lot of resources to
Yeah.
rehearse
Yeah,
everybody.
oh my gosh, I
enough.
can't believe we pulled it off.
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
It sounded great. And,
It was cool.
Yeah. I wondered if I could speak briefly about another side of your practice, which is your collaborations. You're one of the most active and I think successful choreographers that I know who's able to seamlessly cross over from the commercial sort of music world, working with people like David Byrne and St. Vincent, Annie Clark, and Lord and others, and the dance art, performing art world. What have you, in your work with those artists and your work on Broadway with people like David Byrne, what have you taken, how has that informed your work on stages like this? And what are the challenges? You know, what has it taken away?
Okay. So at first I thought, when I first started doing this kind of work, which was a really long time ago, I very much separated in my mind. This was my work,
Right.
and that was gigs.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And they were very separated in my mind. Because I mostly, when I started doing this kind of work, was working with David Byrne, although I had worked with Salt and Pepper and some other people earlier, so it wasn't like I hadn't done
Right.
just
Music videos?
Yeah, music videos.
Right.
I wasn't like that good at it. I was just starting and stuff. But anyway, it was very separate. And because most of it was with David Byrne, his material is so central to how I think aesthetically and how I kind of grew up aesthetically, that
Were you a fan of Stop Making
Oh my
Sense?
God.
And his did he
His
devise
dancing.
his own dancing?
Yeah. He's like one of the best choreographers I know. But anyway, it was very separate. But then over time, the more I have been involved in that as a way to make a living,
Right.
it's not unlike teaching, which is another way to make a living, where it starts to become only about compositional elements. So this happened after I got comfortable with it, you know what I mean, more comfortable with it. So meaning that I could just bring the exact same set of tools that I would bring here into those rooms of how am I using this space? How am I gathering these bodies in the space? How am I dealing with the diagonals in the room, the upstage, the downstage, the back facing? How am I dealing with line and dynamic and, all the elements of choreography? And I would just think about those almost to a point that it became so experimental with some of the pop artists. And I was, for some reason, allowed to go so far out that maybe it was farther out than the audiences. Like, I'll give you an example. One of the shows I did for St. Vincent, I think it was called Mass Seduction. I said, I have this idea that in like 1948, Cunningham came up with this concept called decentralizing space.
Right.
So he said, the center of the space is not the most important place in the room.
Right.
All these places are valuable, they have currency.
Yeah.
So I said to St. Vincent, you standing downstage center with your front body, like you're
Right.
giving it up
Yeah.
at the top of the show. This is a disaster. I was like, why would you give that up at the top? Why would anybody do that? That's like so, de rigueur, and it just feels so like such a mistake. So she's like, explain more. I'm like, okay, so what if and I drew her a map, what if we only brought you downstage center after the audience had earned the right? So like, we'll do like 6, 7 songs where
Right.
you're facing different directions, you're in different places in the room.
Right.
And by the 6th or 7th song, you can be downstage. So she was really into it, and we did it.
How'd it go?
I thought it was beautiful. I'm not sure how the audience felt about it.
People are so used to like come down center.
They want that.
Yeah, right.
They want that. But again, that's the playing with form. Audiences don't, your classic audience doesn't want to play with form. Like on Broadway, they
Right.
do not want to.
Yes,
They feel
right.
they've been, violated in some way, even though they don't know what's happened to them.
Right.
What's actually happened to them is they're experiencing the break of the Aristotelian form or the whatever the forms are in pop
Right.
music. And
Yeah.
David Byrne has obviously changed that.
Yeah.
And people now, that American Utopia is on every mood board, and
Totally.
right.
I mean,
So
and you and David somehow achieved some synthesis with American Utopia that hasn't been met before, hasn't been achieved before.
well, he's just so visual. He was a visual. He went to RISD,
Right,
and he was just
yeah.
like, he doesn't like the chords on stage and the water
Right,
bottles.
yeah.
He's like, why are people on these messy platforms?
Yeah, right, right.
His only directive to me for that was empty
Let's
space,
clear it out,
no
and
chords.
Yeah, right. And in some ways, this is sort of.
Somebody said that.
It's like,
It's a
I
little
hadn't
like
thought
that.
of
I
it
hadn't
until
thought of it
these
either.
curtains,
Somebody
yeah,
texted
yeah.
me on Instagram. It was like, it looks like American Utopia. It's like, really? But
And
yeah.
I had to laugh when I read the New York Times rave review and said, and we've discovered a brand new voice.
Oh, really?
Annie-B Parson. I'm like, 30 years later, it's a little.
That's funny. I don't think I read that. But yeah, so I separated them and then I brought them together over time, where I was just like, they're not really any different. It's still the same issues.
Right.
For me, those are the only things I have.
Yeah.
That's what I got is my toolkit, which I will just go to, and hopefully it will become something else. But like when I return to this kind of material,
Right.
and I'm not working for someone,
Right.
then I just feel more free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If money was no object and also time, was finite, was infinite, would you still seek out those opportunities because you feel like it feeds one another?
They're so stressful.
Yeah.
Because
the time and money is so urgent. And
yeah. Well, I'm also working for somebody.
Right.
So let's see. I just love so many of the people I work with.
Yeah.
I really love them, and I
Right.
am really inspired by them.
The artists.
The artists,
yeah.
the artists themselves. I happen to work with the small group of artists I'm working with now. Well, I'm also working with some visual artists starting this summer.
Oh, great.
Yeah, but
Doing.
doing Arlene Chequette. She's a sculptor and
yeah.
stuff. But with these musicians, I like them and I
Yeah.
like their material.
Right.
So I feel lucky to work with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you seem to develop a trusting, collaborative relationship rather than just
Definitely.
being told what to do.
Oh yeah. Especially with David.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, there was only one thing I remember that David took away that I made for American Utopia, and that was 2 hours of material.
Yeah.
It was only literally one thing, and I think he was wrong.
Well, that's a pretty good record for.
Yeah, and that, I mean, he's very unusual in that way.
Yeah.
So
I'm going back to the mood room for a second, but I was curious. I meant to ask earlier. So much of Big Dance Theater's work is collaborative between you and your partner Paul Lazar, actor, great director. This is a work where Paul wasn't involved.
No.
Was it because of it's a work about women and it's about creating a community of sisters?
Didn't he do
and
this?
Or it might have been spent schedules, or
I can't remember.
Oh, huh.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It might have been schedules, or it might have been sometimes we like to
wasn't
make our
the
own
focus
albums.
on the feminine, or
It could have been.
Yeah,
You know, I
yeah.
actually don't remember. But he
Right.
did come in and work with Theta in scene 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, he worked with Theta the other day, too.
Yeah.
I mean, he still will, you know, it's not like he's not working on it at all.
Right, sure.
But I think he only worked on scene 5
Yeah.
with Theta.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I think he was doing something else.
Theta plays a unique role within. It's almost like they're not fully part of the family, but they comment on and make that funny entrance in.
Yeah.
And could you talk about that role?
It's in the script. It's
Oh, it is?
absolutely what's in the
Oh,
script.
really?
Yeah, the
In
only thing I
Guy de
added
Cointet's,
in the Guy de Cointet, this sister comes in, nobody's home, and she's like, "Oh, I've got my boyfriend. This is great. My sisters aren't here. Come on in." And
Right.
he won't come in, and he won't come in. And the scene is in Guy de Cointet's is shorter
Right.
because I added the whole Chekhov thing.
Yeah.
It's just a year since our parents died. It was very cold then and snowing. I thought I'd never survive it. I just looped that because I use a lot of what I did in this is reiterative.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole bunch of places also within each small section that are like where the sisters sort of echo each other.
Right.
That's me, that's not him.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And it builds a kind of sense of sisterhood.
Yeah,
and,
totally.
you know,
Yeah. Just that repetition that you do constantly
Yeah.
when you're talking to people.
And much to us here at the Walker's surprise is the boyfriend ends up being our crew chief,
I
Aaron.
know, he always is.
Oh, is
Wherever
that?
we've done it,
Oh,
yeah,
you
it's
always
always
bring
the crew person.
Oh,
yeah.
really? Oh,
Yeah,
that's
yours
great.
is particularly good.
Yeah, I was
He's
like,
awesome.
you know,
He's
should
got the part.
get an extra payment for
Yeah.
your role there. But winding up, I guess I had a last couple of questions, and this one comes from your wonderful 2022 book, The Choreography of Everyday Life. You wrote that an overlooked component of artistry is tone, and you referred to Trisha Brown's tone as being efficient and spare. And I wondered, how would you describe Big Dance Theater's tone?
Oh, I do think tone, I often think about tone when I'm looking at work.
Right.
And I'm really interested in it, and I like the way that it's also expressed in color. So the tonality of the performers themselves and the muscularity
Right.
of the performers from
Yeah.
choreographer to choreographer. I think our tone is more linked into the early postmoderns, like you just do things
Right, yeah.
rather than feel.
Judson
yeah,
era,
the whole
yeah.
Judson era, I felt like that just on a muscular,
Right.
just tone level,
Yeah.
it's more simple. And so I feel like because that sort of was my training, like when I came to New York and those were kind of my teachers and stuff,
Right.
that the physical tone of like when also with David, like it just works with his material too.
Right.
So that is sort of the tone of that moment. I do think the tonality of the body continues to change over time in dance. So I'm always interested in that and in the way people use color to reflect it, even if it's subconscious.
Do you mean literal color?
Literal color, and then obviously in this piece, it's not subconscious at all.
Yes,
I'm very
right.
interested in that, like to color and so is Guy de Cointet, because he talks
Yeah.
about red all the time in it.
Right. Yeah.
So tone is like very, very dimensional in a sense, from the muscles to color to vocally. And again, you know, the whole world of Rich Maxwell and all,
Right.
you know, all those, and Foreman and all
Yeah.
these, the way people
Formalists
played with
in
tone.
avant-garde
Yeah.
theater, and yeah, right.
Played with tone. And sometimes in this piece, what I was fighting tonally was arch, people being arch. Because the sisters, the text can feel like, well, I don't, blah, 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 and I don't
Yeah,
like that.
right.
So I'm always trying to take that away.
Almost like leveling. the
Yeah,
tone,
leveling it
isn't
out, and
Yeah.
it's not easy.
Right.
Because the text asks to be a little catty sounding.
Yes, right.
And I don't want to, tonally, I'm not interested in us telling the audience how to perceive the people.
Or how to critique them.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting. You know, just in terms of influence, you said about the postmodernists and the Judson era great dance artists. Your years of teaching at NYU, just in the Times the other day, talked about the wonderful young or mid-career theater makers, Abby and Michael of 600 Hired Men, being so influenced by your teaching of them at NYU. Do you feel like you've had this imprint on a generation?
Oh,
or
God,
two?
I have no idea.
Huh.
I have no idea. I do know I'm teaching Monday morning at 9:30.
Well, I bet you are having that influence. Yeah.
But
I sense
I
it.
don't know.
Yeah. Well, the last question is really, and this may be a depressing way to wrap up our question, but are you feeling optimism or hopefulness or pessimism and despair about the future of, the performing arts in America, or contemporary dance, or, experimental performance in theater now?
I feel despair because I feel like the opportunity to create your work and to practice and practice and practice and practice making choreography is not unlike practicing the piano or, an instrument.
Right.
And if you don't have the opportunity to do that, I'm really not sure how the work develops. And I don't need to tell you that residency support is very rare now.
Right.
The Walker, is pretty singular. There's very, very little residency support. And it's not sexy, and a lot of the funding agencies are taking it out of their, So that's one big concern I have.
Particularly production residency, or just any
all
residency?
residency support. And I don't really get what the plan is of how people will make things.
Right.
I remember the first time that David White and Craig Peterson said to me, you could, when we were making another telepathic thing, they said you could use the studio. Remember the studio behind the theater at DTW?
Yep.
You can use that studio for a month before your opening. And I said, oh, no, I can't. And they said, you can't? And I was like, well, I could never afford that. And they're like, no, we're giving it to you. It's a residency.
Huh.
And I didn't know what a residency was. You know what I mean? Like, I had never had that. You know what I mean? It was like every, you're a choreographer when you rent space and try to get people to go in there and move them around. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And that had sort of been what I've been doing. And then somebody's saying to me, wait, we think we should support this. It just changed. I mean, you know that piece.
Yeah,
it was like one of our favorite pieces.
Lucky to present it here.
You were.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when we came. So, I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned there, obviously, I don't need to, say there are way less venues that are showing experimental dance. Experimental dance is being eaten alive by visual art.
Right.
And they are very, very different forms still in terms of the way people perceive them and what they need and how much rehearsal they need and all that. So even though maybe there's some really cool overlaps, of ideas, which, I'm totally into, it's just that dance itself needs to be treasured as a precious object that is very fragile and always has been very fragile, and people need to be able to take class and go to rehearsal and all those things. It's vanishing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we will hope that we're at a downward, a low ebb, and
and that it's going to change.
Be rebuilding. As
I hope
field
so.
And as a culture in the U.S.
Yeah.
Annie-B Parson, thank you so much.
Thank
for
you. It
your
was so much
work.
fun to talk.
Great to talk.
Thanks for having us.
Wish you the best on everything.
Yeah.